Hello again, I am Blunty. So, in a rare two-parter for me, last time on Blunty's YouTube channel, I spoke about my personal reaction to episode 1 of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. I had a lot of things to say and how Trekky it felt. Short version, I was very encouraged by how it began and how it felt like Trek. So now I wanted to chat about some other reactions I saw as I browsed the hashtag immediately after watching the episode to see what other people were talking about and see if my sort of opinion lined up with a lot of other people's or whether I was an outlier or not. Kate was the first one, and before we dig deeper, I just wanted to show this as it sums up my general reaction, just to set the tone and stage of my view for those who haven't yet seen my previous video. Strong, tight story, dazzling visuals, compelling, likable characters with a strong cast, and a compelling, charm-filled performance from Captain Pike as a very, very strong lead. So, the next thing I saw was this, and this pandy person has been spamming this to dozens of accounts, to the official Twitter for Trek and people involved in the production, actors and producers, I suppose, just vomiting it everywhere, desperate to be seen and heard on his little opinion here. Clearly they feel very, very strongly about this rather idiotic detail, quite honestly. He's clearly really disturbed by the fact that modern day slang is being used by future humans. Firstly, it's for practicality's sake. It's to make the characters feel relatable, you dingus. If you make them speak weird because English kids continue to evolve, or you give them made-up new slang, it will be distracting. If a character said, "That's Fringus's tonk," instead of cool, it would not make the show better. It'd make it dumber. Sure, some sci-fi like Battlestar, Firefly, and Farscape have used words like frack or goram and frel as standard words for swearing that wouldn't have otherwise been permitted by their ratings and how TV worked back then. Trek doesn't need that these days. They're allowed to say shit. Though Trek has had a lot of invented and adapted slang, like putak, a little Klingon insult occasionally borrowed by humans whose English translation probably wouldn't be TV friendly. How about spoonhead, a nice little racist slur from Bajor? Secondly, and if you're as caring about immersion as much as you claim to be, Uhura saying cool is hardly anachronous to her character. She's a friggin' linguist, you pillock. Her literal whole deal is that she loves foreign languages and cultures, and she's super duper good at it. So for her to not have an extensive vocabulary of slang, especially from her own home world, it would be absurd. And I don't know about you, but I have a few perfectly prominent words that get rarely used in everyday conversation these days that I love sprinkling in because I like the sound of them. I saw a couple of different takes on this one too. The claim that anyone who considers SNW, Strange New Worlds, the acronym, a better show than Discovery is just lying and are just slaves to nostalgia instead of being objective. Now, which show one considers better is of course subjective and personal, but no, just no. Based on the first episode alone, NSW has way better writing and direction and acting than Disco does, and everyone in episode 1 of New Worlds is terrific and entirely in the moment, while only some of the cast in Disco are convincing and believable as characters at all, rather than actors transparently hamming it the fuck up to pantomime levels of distracting absurdity. And to be fair, some of that is the really badly written dialogue they're given to plonk through. Oh, here's one I was expecting. The keywords here that unmask this person are heavy on the diversity quota. That right there tells me this person isn't actually comprehending what Trek is. They're not actually a fan of Trek at all, probably, and has never been. Now, I don't feel the need to spell this out for most of you, but yeah, diversity is kind of one of the absolute basic and core ideas of Trek, if you've never noticed. From the casting of the very first show, deliberately gender, culturally and racially diverse, and something Roddenberry and the other creators had to fight for as the network pushed back against it. And a fight that Roddenberry didn't even always win. He lost the battle to keep the ship's first officer as female, as she was in the pilot, but removed from the ongoing show. And now, of course, she's back on Strange New Worlds, and of course, Pike's #1, and with a name this time and everything. She didn't get a name the first time around, although her name literally means one, which is a bit on the nose for my tastes, because she's #1. Hell, even the phrase infinite diversity in infinite combinations is the absolute cornerstone and basis of Vulcan philosophy, and always has been, the iconic symbol for which is called the idic, a phonetic pronunciation of the English translation of the phrase itself. It's the acronym. And I know, Even a few self-proclaimed hardcore trekkers just had a mind-blown moment there. And yeah, I didn't notice it for a long time either until I wrote them both down a few years back. And I went, hang on a sec. But yeah, to complain about deliberate diversity casting in a Star Trek show is dude, come on, get serious. You're making a clown out of yourself and everybody can see it. Now, finally, I want to close out with something more serious and earnest. And this one's going to be a longer one. Callisto shouting out a big ableism warning. And this is something that came up in Pike's first appearance in Discovery too. So, in the original series, Pike was a captain of the Enterprise for the pilot. He was swapped with Kirk at the behest of the network, wanting a more of a action hero type instead of Pike, who was seen by the network as too cerebral, I think was the word they used. And fair enough, Pike's first appearance was hardly the most compelling guy. But Pike came back in the original series later, having been in a massive accident and bound to a mobile life support machine. His injuries so severe he could only communicate in beeps for yes and no. But this new version of Pike also has the same fate, and it's a fate he knows is coming thanks to some sci-fi timey-wimey shenanigans that happened to him in Discovery. So they're writing him as a man dealing with a fatal and incurable illness, basically. Something that won't kill him, but will cripple him so severely his life as he knows it will be over. Kind of like ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, or indeed something like what I saw my own grandfather go through, as multiple sclerosis slowly robbed him of his own mobility, his personal agency, and eventually even his ability to speak to us, his family. One of the most heartbreaking things I've ever experienced, by the way. But for Pike, it won't be slow. It won't be a deterioration. It'll be all at once. And he already knows what it'll feel like and how it'll happen. And there is absolutely no way to avoid it or even mitigate it. And there is an argument to be made for how this is being written as being kind of horribly ableist, if you interpret as accepted societal fact that being severely disabled in the Star Trek universe future as a whole is considered a life-ending experience or a fate worse than death, as Callisto put it. There are plenty of people right here, right now, in the real world who live with physical disabilities and live well and fully and happily. Some with content lives of friends and family and adventure and joy. And even some who have been truly world-changingly extraordinary, like perhaps most famously Stephen Hawking, who did indeed have ALS and also has actually appeared in Star Trek as himself, holographically at least, and at the whim of a poker-playing android. And in Star Trek, well, we've had some uneven times dealing with the matters of physical disabilities. Geordi stands out, of course, as a core cast member dealing with a permanent disability he was born with. And then there's one of characters like the DS9 episode Melora, which is very well-meaning but kind of whiffs the ball a few times, but it does at least show a lot of the curious novelty, medicalization and infantilization that people with especially mobility disabilities would be very familiar with, and the frustrations that come along with that of not being seen as a person first. Back to Pike. I think the reaction of calling this ableist is a bit premature. Even by the end of the first episode, we see Spike starting to reframe and recontextualize his feelings about his fated future. I think throughout the season, we'll see this continue as he slowly comes to terms with what that means, because it is something you just can't wrap up in an episode. And this feels right to me. And I speak as someone with a perspective on this. I consider a meaningful perspective. I've spent the last 17 years of my life in constant pain. Some days are better than others. Some days I'm literally immobilized by it, functionally crippled by it. Some days I can't sit in a chair for too long. Some days I can't walk at all. Some days, like today, it's just a background sort of dull, aching misery that never leaves the back of my mind. For 17 years, I've been continually conscious that I'm in pain. It kind of sucks. And my path to coming to terms with what my chronic pain meant to me, to who I was, how it limited me and how it has changed me as a person, are all things that take time, a long time. And over that time, the pain is getting worse. I've been having more and more bad days as time rolls on. And for many years after the accident, I had a very deep and very real dread of winding up in a wheelchair as that progressed. And I had already seen my grandfather go through something like that. His MS left him in constant pain, and throughout my entire childhood, I saw him go from leg brace to cane to walking frame to mobility scooter to wheelchair, and I saw how that affected him, and I saw how that changed him. He never spoke about it to me. I was just a kid. He didn't want to put that on me. He put on his bravest face, and he was the best goddamn grandfather he possibly could be. And he was a great grandfather. But I wasn't just a kid. I was a kid with undiagnosed autism. And one of my autism special tricks for me was an unusually accurate sense of empathy. So I saw through his mask. I saw him, and it broke my heart. So much so, I couldn't even find the strength to visit him in his final hospitalized days, an act of selfish self-protection I am still ashamed of today. Disabilities do change lives, and pretending they don't is ignorance at its finest. And to those it comes to later in life or creeps up on gradually, it takes a lot to process and come to terms with that, if you can come to terms with it at all. So Pike being horrified at his fate isn't ableism. It's not telling the world that disabled people are worse off than if they just died. It's trying to show people that it's hard to accept what an accident or disease or even fact of birth can mean to you as a person in a world designed and to cater to able-bodied folk, especially if you've lived in that world as an able-bodied person first. Pike's fear about how knowing his life as he knows it will be over within a decade will affect him as a person. It can't not. It's not ableism they're showing here. It screams to me as honest. I felt that. I still do. And I saw my grandfather feel it too. And my pain, even though I can largely operate relatively physically unhindered in the world, at least so far, has absolutely changed who I am. Undoubtedly. There's only a couple of people still in my life that knew me before the accident, and they have all seen it too. They've spoken to me about it. Now, I'm not worse. I'm not imagining that if I didn't live under a constant drone of pain and more physical limitations than the average person faces, that I'd be better off as a person somehow. That's really not how it works. I'm not even angry about it anymore. And I was, for a long time, I was bitter and resentful and very angry about it. But dealing with something like this, processing it, it is a process. And if they were to write Pike as just nonchalantly accepting this, just shrugging it off and going, oh well, at least I won't die, could be worse. On with my day of being dry-witted at Spock and the gang. And that's just an unrealistic path for a person to take in that position. We have to see this so-called ableist stuff, because while living with a disability isn't worse than death, it is for many people a huge upheaval in life, and it is scary, and it does make you question yourself and reveal any internalized ableism you may already have. I certainly did. Even though I saw my grandfather go through it, I didn't fully process what that meant, because I was a kid with a bunch of his own problems. It does seem like Callisto does also speak from personal experience when the concerns around ableism. They have a little wheelchair emoji in their bio, so chances are pretty good they are speaking from experience, as most people don't even think about this stuff when it comes to TV shows and such, which is part of the whole point here, watching Pike go through it, exposing that process to normal people. And like I said, they absolutely have a point and are right to worry about the way this will be represented going forward, considering how rarely it has been handled properly in the past, not just on Star Trek, but in TV and movies as a whole. But I do say it's too soon to draw that bow all the way back. I think from what we saw in the first episode has already shown with Pike and his processing of it, he's starting to process it. We're on a path that feels steady. We're on a path that feels natural. We're on a path that feels real, at least to my experience. So even if they do lean into some ableist tropes and things like that, I think that's going to work for the story if they're writing it with enough care, and if they're writing it with the input of someone who has actually been through this kind of thing. Nothing about us without us, as the phrase goes. Now, speaking personally, I don't really claim the label disabled, because I can function okay in the world. I have certain limitations, things I can't do and things I will never be able to do ever again. And some days, like I said, I'm literally just incapacitated, unable to move without screaming in pain. But, you know, all things being relative, I don't think that label is ready for me yet. So I am eager to hear the opinions and thoughts of people who do speak from I guess a deeper experience or a more profound experience of mobility disabilities. And I know some of my regulars here do live with that kind of stuff. So please, if you're feeling sort of open and want to talk about it, pop it in the down below. If not, that's fine too, because again, I know how difficult this is to talk about it. When writing the parts about my grandfather for the notes for the script for this, I broke down a few times, because that still is a really painful experience. That I've I've tried to process, but I don't think it's ever something that's going to go. And my own fears going forward, what my life is going to be like in another 10 years, as my back sort of gradually gets worse and worse. It's not fun to think about that stuff, because there are things I enjoy doing now that I just won't be able to do anymore. And that sucks. It just sucks. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Hopefully this has been probably fun in the first half. And the reason I set it up like this is because I wanted to get to this deep chunk stuff in the second half of this video. So anyone sort of interested in this sort of really hopefully gets something really worthwhile out of it. Because I knew if I started with this sort of very, very deep cut stuff that probably a lot of people would have lost interest. So I don't know. I wonder how many people hung around for the whole thing. If you did, thank you very much. Thank you as always to the patrons, of course. I am Blunty, and I will catch you next time. And yeah, super duper looking forward to Strange New Worlds going forward. I'm going to sit down in the dark for a while. I've upset myself a little bit.